Nations says 2 million people have now fled Ukraine since the beginning of Russia's invasion. As civilian areas continue to come under sustained attack, people are leaving with the hope of finding safety.
The headlines.
Many of those people are coming into the EU, crossing the borders of Poland, Hungary and Romania. Now, some of those Ukrainians who've made it to safety in the EU have been arriving into Brussels, which is where our correspondent Maeve McMahon is now live for us.
President Zelenskyy tells
UK MPs
in the House of Parliament that Ukraine will
continue to fight on.
Well, it's been a long,
here in the Cube, we map out the so-called humanitarian corridors, allowing Ukrainian civilians
here in order to
safely
register that they have arrived in Brussels and that they need help.
More than 2 million people have now fled the violence in Ukraine, escaping from their homeland
by
in
the wider
search of
community here in
safety.
Brussels, because we've seen a wave of solidarity among
Banning
locals
Russian
here
energy
in the city and
imports.
across
New
Belgium,
announcements today
people
from the
offering their
US,
homes
the
and
UK
offering
and
safe
the
shelter,
EU
especially
on
to the women
reducing
and children
dependency
that
on
they've
Russian
seen
oil
pouring
and
into
gas.
Brussels in need of help. And joining me now for more on this
Hello
is
and welcome to the
Martin
program. I'm Per
Michalski. He's from the
Forsnyberg.
Open Dialogue
Ukraine's
Foundation,
President Volodymyr
and he's very
Zelenskyy
personally
said
involved
Ukraine
in
will
this, and also
continue
professionally.
fighting until
He's
the
been at the
end
front line of
during
the
a video
protests over the
statement
last
to
couple
the
of
UK
days in
Parliament.
order to
In his
call for
video
more
message streamed
solidarity
live
for
in the
Ukrainians.
House of Commons, Zelenskyy
what have you
quoted
seen? Have you seen a lot of
Shakespeare and
people
Winston
here come to
Churchill
help these
in
people
an
in need
address
who visibly
brimming
look
with
very
defiance.
traumatized tonight?
Ukraine's
Yes,
leader
indeed.
praised
I can
his
give an
heroic
example of one of
military
my best
servicemen
friends who's actually a
and
landlord
compared
here in
Ukrainian
Brussels. He owns
resilience
several
to
buildings.
that shown by
He has actually
Britain
offered
during
all of
World
his
War II.
apartments to
However,
Ukrainian
he
families. He has already
reiterated that
several living
sanctions
with
were
him. So I know
not
that the
enough,
Belgian people,
and
they
again
really want to help, and
underlined
they're
his
doing
desire
all
for a
that they
no-fly
can.
zone.
We've been speaking to a lot of these people who've been arriving, and many of them don't want to be here, Martin. They say they miss their dogs, they miss their parents. Some of them told me they miss their boyfriend. It's a really hard time for them.
Indeed, we are talking to the people arriving in Poland, and more often than not, they have with them only one or two suitcases. They have left their homes, their lives, often their families. So, of course, for now, they want to feel safe in Europe, but they are waiting for the day when they can come back to their homes. Hopefully, it will be soon.
And is Poland managing to absorb these people? 1 million people have arrived so far to your home country, to Poland?
Yes, indeed, over 1 million. By now, the response of the Polish people has been absolutely amazing. Our NGO, the Open Dialogue Foundation, we're only one of many who are supporting the refugees coming. We have ourselves over 50 activists from various street movements, pro-LGBT, pro-women's rights, pro-democracy. And they are working around the clock to link the generous offers coming from Polish citizens, hundreds of offers of accommodation, transport, jobs, schools, with thousands of refugees coming, requiring this help. We even have several dozen cars, private citizens who are offering their time, who have taken the days off their work to drive refugees from the border to wherever they need to go within Poland.
And have you faith in the European Union's plan to absorb all these people?
Now let's head live to London and speak to our reporter Vincent McAviney, who's live for us there in London. Vincent, again, President Zelenskyy talking about this no-fly zone, make the skies over Ukraine safe. Will his address actually make a difference in terms of UK policy?
Deliver, of course, humanitarian aid and help the refugees, but also, most of all, help the people on the front lines by delivering weapons and by pressuring NATO to close the sky over Ukraine.
Okay, Martin Michalski from the Open Dialogue Foundation, thank you so much for joining us on Euronews tonight.
And thank you, Maeve and Martin, for joining us live from Brussels. US President Joe Biden has announced a complete US ban on Russian oil, gas and coal imports. It's the latest move to try and squeeze Moscow's finances. Biden's decision to target Russia's lucrative industry received widespread bipartisan political support, despite fears gas prices across the U.S. will now skyrocket. He says the sanctions are already hurting Moscow and that the U.S. will help EU countries not be as dependent on Russian energy. A Ukrainian author who fled the war in her country has warned the European Parliament against hesitation in the fight against Russia.
As well. On International Women's Day, the European Parliament paid tribute to the resilience of Ukrainian women. The writer Oksana Zabulko took the floor. Through her writings, she always gives a voice to women who may be the victim of violence or simply being ignored by defending their ideas. On Tuesday, she stood up for their rights to live.
Talking about the fact that we have had this experience as well, and Ukrainian people are now having, and that's why the world and British people should continue to support the Ukrainians in their struggle. And you can see the support across the House there. There were people in a lot of blue and yellow dresses, blue and yellow ties, all with ribbons on, calls for the support to continue from all parties, all sides are unified on this. And also the hope that one day President Zelenskyy would be able to come and address them in person, and that they all should be put up for the UK's highest civilian honour, which is a knighthood.
And by this,
now, Vincent, President Zelenskyy has made it very clear that if the leaders are not going to vote for a no-fly zone, he wants to address the people. The parliamentarians, try to get them to convince the leaders to put this into place. He's also said that this is also the responsibility of those countries that are not voting for that no-fly zone. That was something that he said earlier today. In his address, obviously there was a standing ovation there in Parliament today. Do you think those parliamentarians will be able to affect Boris Johnson on his decision-making going forward?
Europe, and it's the European cities, the cities of Ukraine, are being under carpet bombing. Well, it is time to think about your own security.
Oksana Zabulko left Ukraine 2 weeks ago and doesn't know when she will be able to return home. Sándor Zsíros, Euronews, Strasbourg.
The real pressure, I think, here is not going to be on the
no comment from Brussels, where demonstrators showed solidarity with Ukraine on International Women's Day. Thank you so much for watching Euronews tonight.
Possible nuclear conflict, that is something that no one wants, and the vast majority of MPs know that sadly a no-fly. So something that worked so effectively in the First Gulf War, when it was a power that had nuclear weapons, that won't work in this case. So I think what we're going to be seeing all those MPs doing is putting more pressure, particularly on the refugee scheme. As it stands, in the last update we had from the Home Office, only 300 visa applications have been granted for refugees to come and join their family here. There are around 50,000 or so applications that have been started. There's been controversy that some wrong information has gone out telling people that they might be able to get processed in Calais, only for them to then be told that they actually need to go back to Paris or Brussels. And when other European countries, and of course the UK is not in the EU, so there is the same freedom of movement, but when other European countries are taking in tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, recognizing that they're escaping shelling and this has to be fast-tracked, there is real frustration among British MPs that the system here is not working quick enough, that 2 weeks almost into this war, there hasn't been a ramp up, because apart from coming and joining a family member already here in the UK, there is talk about perhaps some kind of sponsorship system. So a business or something like that could sponsor a Ukrainian coming into that country. But again, it's more bureaucracy. So I think MPs know that the no-fly zone really is a non-starter. They'll be pushing more military aid and more help for refugees.
Right, Vincent McAviney live for us in London. One such thing there will also be those planes. We did hear from the UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace earlier today that he would support Poland if they do decide to send in those fighter planes into Ukraine. Thank you so much there, Vincent McAviney live for us in London. I want to turn now to our correspondent, Sasha Vakulina, who joins me now live here in the studio. Sasha, we've seen a standing ovation for President Zelenskyy in the European Parliament, in the British Parliament, but how is he being received at home in his home country?
I would say that even those people who did not support Zelenskyy when he won with over 70% now do support him. There is a huge strength and support towards him. According to the latest information, over 90% of Ukrainians are supporting Volodymyr Zelenskyy. He has proven to be there. You've seen his videos that he's recording almost daily when he's sitting in his office, because of course of the rumors that he fled Ukraine, that he's in Poland, that he's no longer in Kiev. he is there. He hasn't left his administration. He does go out into the streets. We saw that, but he is in Kyiv. And he is standing there, one of them. He's one of those Ukrainians who are now fighting. Apart from the military, apart from the armed forces, we also have the territorial defense in Ukraine. There are people who voluntarily are fighting, people who are armed and ready to fight and defend their houses. Even if they're not there in the streets for the moment, they are in their houses protecting their family and they're ready to defend the family. Zelenskyy is one of them. This is why this support by the Ukrainians. Over 90% now, even those who were against him, are supporting him now, and this is really significant. Same way as up to 80% of Ukrainians now, according to the latest stats, do believe that Ukraine is going to win this.
Obviously, that is one of his key messages. Today, he was recording that video in his office saying he is still in Ukraine, in his office. He's not running, he's not hiding.
And he's not going to.
No. Well, that seems to be the message that he wants to portray. And I want to ask you as well about this no-fly zone. We keep talking about the no-fly zone. Zelenskyy asking for it, NATO and the Western allies saying no. What kind of a difference would a no-fly zone make for Zelenskyy and for those Ukrainian troops?
Well, this is a very complicated scheme that would, of course, secure the skies over Ukraine with very complex system, which means there will not be bombs dropped from the air. There will not be Russian planes. There won't be helicopters. And this would be something that would rather also then limit the current fighting. What he said a few days ago, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, if we can only fight them on the land, we're going to bid that out. That's going to be so much easier. We'll be able to focus more forces here, help us to close the sky so that we can focus on the sea and we can focus on the land.
Sasha Vakulina, thank you so much for that analysis, joining us here in the studio. And civilian evacuations are underway now along two humanitarian corridors in Ukraine. This comes after a failed ceasefire on Saturday and Sunday and failed evacuation attempts from the city of Mariupol. Ukrainian officials say that today's ceasefire has allowed more than 1,000 civilians to leave key areas threatened by Russian shelling. And with more on this, let's turn over to Matthew in the Cube.
The 13th day since Russia's invasion into Ukrainian territory. And as you heard there from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, as well as the United Nations, the number of civilian casualties, including children, continues to rise. Now, as you can see from this map, Russian forces have been making inroads in the south of the country through the annexed Crimean Peninsula. And although their progress in other regions has seemingly stalled, big cities like Kharkiv and Kyiv are still seeing shelling. Thousands of people are trying to leave these areas. And this has led to calls for so-called humanitarian corridors, routes that allow civilians safe passage from these besieged cities and towards safety. Russia says that in recent days it has agreed to 2 ceasefires and has opened some of these corridors. But let's put this on a map for you. Over the weekend, a proposed route from the southern city of Mariupol to Zaporizhia here in the south, well, that failed. Both sides accusing each other of breaking the ceasefire, and Ukraine today says it has more evidence that Russian forces have been shelling Mariupol. But today, however, a safe humanitarian corridor was established between the city of Sumy here in the northeast, further south towards Poltava. That is due to expire at around 9 o'clock local time, that's 8 p.m. Central European time, and so far Ukrainian officials say that evacuations along that route have been successful. Meanwhile, there is also a second corridor from the town of Irpin here in the suburbs of Kyiv towards the Ukrainian capital. And officials again from Kyiv say that so far around 300 people have been safely evacuated along that route. Now, Russia in total had initially said that it had offered 10 evacuation routes, but most of these would involve going through either Russia itself or Belarus to the north. Ukraine said that those proposals were completely immoral. So, Per, while there are some safe evacuation routes from those besieged cities in Ukraine, Ukrainian officials still say that Russia is shelling those humanitarian corridors and is calling for international pressure on Moscow.
Thank you so much there, Matthew, in the Cube. And I want to stay on this topic because Ukrainian authorities say a ceasefire in the southeastern city of Mariupol was violated by Russian forces, disrupting evacuation efforts. Buses were sent in carrying humanitarian aid, but Kyiv says rescue attempts were foiled by Russian shelling on the escape route. The besieged city of Mariupol remains under heavy Russian attack and without water or power supplies. An estimated 200,000 people still hope to flee. And evacuation efforts are underway in the northeastern city of Sumy after air raids killed at least 21 people, including 2 children. Residents became the first in Ukraine to use the so-called humanitarian corridor since previous ceasefires failed to hold. Hundreds from the Kyiv suburb of Irpin have also escaped amid days of sustained Russian bombing. Elderly residents had to navigate shattered roads and bridges. Families gathered children and pets to flee now unrecognizable homes. The United Nations says 2 million people have now fled Ukraine since the beginning of Russia's invasion. As civilian areas continue to come under sustained attack, people are leaving with the hope of finding safety. Many of those people are coming into the EU, crossing the borders of Poland, Hungary, and Romania. Now, some of those Ukrainians who've made it to safety in the EU have been arriving into Brussels, which is where our correspondent Maeve McMahon is now live for us. Maeve, how have those refugees been received there in Brussels?
Well, it's been a long, difficult day for hundreds of Ukrainian refugees who've been waiting in long lines here in order to register that they have arrived in Brussels and that they need help. NGOs have been coming throughout the day, bringing them food and bringing them clothes that have been donated by the wider community here in Brussels, because we've seen a wave of solidarity among locals here in the city and across Belgium, people offering their homes and offering safe shelter, especially to the women and children that they've seen pouring into Brussels in need of help. And joining me now for more on this is Martin Michalski. He's from the Open Dialogue Foundation and he's very personally involved in this and also professionally. He's been at the front line of the protests over the last couple of days in order to call for more solidarity for the Ukrainians. Tell us, what have you seen? Have you seen a lot of people here come to help these people in need who visibly look very traumatized tonight?
Yes, indeed. I can give an example of one of my best friends who's actually a landlord here in Brussels. He owns several buildings. He has actually offered all of his apartments to Ukrainian families. He has already several living with him. So I know that the Belgian people, they really want to help and they are doing all that they can.
And we've been speaking to a lot of these people who've been arriving, and many of them don't want to be here, Martin. They say they miss their dogs, they miss their parents. Some of them told me they miss their boyfriend. It's a really hard time for them.
Indeed, we are talking to the people arriving in Poland, and more often than not, they have with them only 1 or 2 suitcases. They have left their homes, their lives, often their families. So, of course, for now, they want to feel safe in Europe, but they are waiting for the day when they can come back to their homes. Hopefully, it will be soon.
And is Poland managing to absorb these people? 1 million people have arrived so far to your home country, to Poland?
Yes, indeed, over 1 million. By now, the response of the Polish people has been absolutely amazing. Our NGO, the Open Dialogue Foundation, we're only one of many who are supporting the refugees coming. We have ourselves over 50 activists from various street movements, pro-LGBT, pro-women's rights, pro-democracy. And they are working around the clock to link the generous offers coming from Polish citizens, hundreds of offers of accommodation, transport, jobs, schools, with the thousands of refugees coming requiring this help. We even have several dozen cars, private citizens who are offering their time, who have taken the days off their work to drive refugees from the border to wherever they need to go within Poland.
And have you faith in the European Union's plan to absorb all these people?
Well, hopefully. For now, the European Union has been quite slow to react. Of course, it's getting better. That's also one of the main topics of our rally on Sunday here in Brussels. We're we're asking the European Union not just to deliver, of course, humanitarian aid and help the refugees, but also, most of all, help the people on the front lines by delivering weapons and by pressuring NATO to close the sky over Ukraine.
OK, Martin Michalski from the Open Dialogue Foundation, thank you so much for joining us on Euronews Tonight.
And thank you, Maeve and Martin, for joining us live from Brussels. US President Joe Biden has announced a complete US ban on Russian oil, gas and coal imports. It's the latest move to try and squeeze Moscow's finances. Biden's decision to target Russia's lucrative industry received widespread bipartisan political support, despite fears gas prices across the U.S. will now skyrocket. He says the sanctions are already hurting Moscow and that the U.S. will help EU countries not be as dependent on Russian energy. A Ukrainian author who fled the war in her country has warned the European Parliament against hesitation in the fight against Russia. Sandor Giros reports.
On International Women's Day, the European Parliament paid tribute to the resilience of Ukrainian women. The writer Oksana Zabujko took the floor. Through her writings, she always gives a voice to women who may be the victim of violence or simply being ignored by defending their ideas. On Tuesday, she stood up for their right to live.
They are just fighting against the darkness of totalitarianism that is about to devour their country, because Putin has claimed that there will be no Ukraine, there should be no Ukraine, and it means we all are denied our existence. So they protect their country, they protect their cities, they protect their homes, their families and their loved ones. And by this they protect Europe without any special premeditation.
Yeah.
She says Ukrainian women are now fighting in her country and even giving birth in caves, and underlined that every moment of hesitation by Western nations is costing lives.
Wake up and help us fighting before they come to you. Right now, when the war is already here, the war is in Europe, and it's, well, the European cities, the cities of Ukraine, are being under carpet bombing. Well, it is time to think about your own security.
Oksana Zabujko left Ukraine 2 weeks ago and doesn't know when she will be able to return home. Sándor Zsíros, Euronews, Strasbourg.
And we leave you now with a no comment from Brussels, where demonstrators showed solidarity with Ukraine on International Women's Day. Thank you so much for watching Euronews Tonight.
Everyone can witness that. Stop war! Stop Russia! Stop war! Stop Russia! Stop war! Say together. Cut Russian oil! Cut Russian gas! Cut Russia! With their families, with their kids, in the square, this war. Stop Russia! Stop war! Stop Russia! Stop war! Germany is not ready to impose oil embargo in Russia. Now! NATO! Act now! NATO! Act now! Act now!